So I have been carrying out an experiment to try and work out which one of the different sensors fits my Frankenstein of a Defender. So I thought this might be quite a useful exercise because there's a whole load of different types of sensors, some of which obviously geometrically are very, very different, but others are much the same. So you'll see I'm putting some time lapse in now of going through the exercise, and the results are quite interesting. We've got a bit of a range, so we'll start over here with this one, which I think is for the EFI system, because you can see geometrically it's very, very different. This has got quite a different spread, so 1 kilo ohm at room temperature to about 100 ohms at 100 degrees C. So quite a small spread there, but probably because it's going into an EFI system, the ECU might be a bit more accurate at reading the temperatures. Then we're on to the ones with the spade terminals. So these are much like what is in the car, but obviously all I can see is the spade terminal and the hex. So I wasn't sure which one of these was actually fitted to the car, because taking it out leaves a great big hole in the cooling system, making it very difficult to just, take out and walk away with to find out what's going on, short of draining the cooling system. So this was my first option that I thought might be correct. Now you can see this is quite a bit different to the others because it's got a fine thread on here, this PRC 8001. And then these other two, which is the 2506 and 2505, they are incredibly similar. So they're very similar threads, slightly different sealing patterns. This one's got a rubber O-ring. This has got like a little fiber gasket on it. But these are all relatively similar in terms of their output. So in theory, any one of these should work for our sensor, for our gauge. But this one here, the PRC 8001, is slightly different. So while it was reading about the same at temperature, at room temperature it was slightly different. So I suspected it looked like the engine was a bit colder than it actually was as it's warming up. But these other two here, the 2505 and 2506, they were reading basically exactly the same at the different temperatures. So really, I think, given I know that now it's a coarse thread on the vehicle, not a fine thread, rules this one out completely. We know this one's for the EFI system and is completely wrong geometry-wise. So we're down to these two. So I think it's just going to be down to the sealing method, which I think is a fibre gasket like that, rather than an embedded O-ring like that. Although I suspect both will probably do the job. So the next thing is to get the temperature sensor back out of the engine again, plug it with my thumb, and then compare it to these two and work out which one I'm going to go with. And when I've done it, I'm going to document which one actually fits the vehicle, so I know for future, or whoever has it after me, that if you ever need to do this again, which one of these many different temperature sensors for a Defender to buy. So hopefully this is useful to anybody else who's got a bit of a Frankenstein and is trying to work out what sensor goes in what. So you might remember from the earlier video that this is the offending article here, and it looks like there's a sort of a washer or seal of some sort on the back. So the two that I showed you, I think it's going to be the one with the washer on rather than the rubber seal that we're going to use on here. So first things first, just pull that off and let's see if we can get a spanner or a socket to get that out. So we have the offending article out. I'm holding this at a funny angle because my thumb is still covering the hole in the engine block, so I can just show you what it looks like. So it's pretty clear this is the correct item. Now it's extracted, so it's a PRC 2506. So we'll get this one out of the bag and get this one inside, and we'll test it once this is all in and the system is sealed again. Both hands back now, so the last thing to do is just push the spade terminal on and then start the engine and see if the temperature gauge comes up steadily or just disappears straight over the other side. Fingers crossed. So hopefully you can just about hear me over the noisy engine. and we can see the temperature gauge hasn't really started moving yet. And previously, as soon as there was a tiny amount of heat in the engine, it was pinging hard over to hot. Also, while we're waiting for it to warm up, you can see I've been able to set the odometer to what is on the gauge over here. So 987, you can't quite see there. So it'll actually count up from there, which is quite neat. So we're just seeing a little bit of temperature come into the engine, which is good. This isn't firing over. So I think after all of that, it may have been a dead sensor. So maybe I was a bit quick. The engine has been running now for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. There is no way it's gone to overheat that quickly. The engine is still quite cold. Still got a little bit of choke on, and it's not running smooth as it does when it's warmed up. And we're now seeing it go off the gauge, albeit not as hard as it used to before. So I'm not quite sure what is going on here, because it's not massively far off, but it's still not quite right. And if it was a short in the circuit, it would straight away go all the way over to hot. So before anybody panics that I am running this engine super hot all the time, there is barely detectable heat in this hose. The engine is not warm. So either the dial isn't what it says it is, I've got the wrong dial, there's a faulty dial. We definitely know this is a correct sensor, it threads in properly, it's a replacement for what was there. It should be compatible. All the other sensors, I mean, put the other sensor in, it's got the same temperature range, so it's going to do the same thing on the dial as well, I think. So now I'm going to look for another dial. This is getting a little ridiculous. I've got 4 different sensors. I've already got 2 different voltage gauges because the Smith's gauge didn't work properly. And now I'm going to have a second temperature gauge. Ugh. Hello and welcome back to a very noisy Automotive Tales. I'm back, as you can tell, in the Land Rover, and I'm just warming it through to see if our new temperature gauge is working. Nope. So I have just fired the engine up and already we're up to half temperature. Somehow I don't think this is the right one either. Ugh! So I have tried a whole myriad of gauges. So this was the original one that I tried. This is the new one. They are different part numbers, supposedly for different sensors, but I can guarantee you this car is not overheating. On the plus side, we are reading sort of a little over, sort of 15 volts, but the volt gauge is at least working. So while I think I know what the solution is probably going to end up being, I thought I'd procrastinate and try a few things. So I have some near boiling water here. I have a 12 volt supply rigged up to this little thing I've set up. I'm going to watch and see how this temperature gauge goes. Then I'm going to try some other temperature gauges and some other sensors and see if we can actually get a matching pair. Well, as you can see, the temperature gauge is rock solid. So this is a system we should have in the car. We shouldn't be seeing it ping over to the right. So this system with the Smith's gauge actually appears to be working. So there's 2 things to test. First of all is the gauge that I've just taken out of the car, and ignore this falling off over here. The second thing to test is this gauge in the car. So time to disassemble and go again. Okay, so this is the gauge I was trying to get to work before. Just double check we've got the sensor live is on the opposite side. That is now live. Okay, well that's reassuring. So straight off the gauge. So I'm not going completely mad. Now let me just go and try the one I have just fitted to the car and see whether that does the same thing as well. If it does, then it looks like this Smith's gauge might well be the job. Okay, so this is the new Lucas unit that I've just bought that I thought was the match for the sensors that are in the car. So all I need to do is just attach the power to this terminal. And there we go, same again. So it is an issue with a combination of the sensor and the dials just not being correct. This is the same as the one that's in the car, so I've replaced the one in the car. I'm still getting the same result. Take that off so it doesn't damage it. So As I can't get any of the other sensors to fit, and they're all about the same resistance range, I'm concluding that with the V8 engine from the Range Rover and the Defender dials is just not compatible. But it looks like this little fella is going to do the job. So let's get this in the car before I lose my mind and buy an aftermarket kit and see if it works. So the first job to do is to change this terminal, because the Smith's gauge has got 2 male spades like that on the actual gauge, whereas all the other ones have had 1 male, 1 female. So I'm going to swap that over. I'm not going to show you the rest of the wiring behind here because it's slightly terrifying and it's a little bit messy. As you can see, I've just been using cheap little spades for now. I'm going to tidy it all up at some point. In fact, there's some I'm going to show you later in this video, which I'm very not proud of, but was a means to an end at the time I was doing it. So I'm going to get on and replace this, and I'll show you the finished article. So there we go, that's the finishing touches. So it's a little spade terminal with a bit of heat shrink on, just to hold it all in place and make it look neat and tidy, and they come with these little clear covers as well, so it doesn't short anything behind the dashboard, which is quite nice. Green is the signal wire that was originally in the wiring loom for the temperature sender. So that's the same wire then that runs all the way through down to the original loom. Right, let's get the gauge installed. Ignore the mess in there. So the engine has been running for a few minutes now, and it is actually slowly coming up to temperature. This is a lot longer than it took for the other one to go right off into the red. So fingers crossed, this is actually working. So hopefully you can hear me over this noisy big old engine, but there's definitely some heat in here. Not here yet, the thermostat hasn't opened, so it is nowhere near boiling yet, but that looks about right. So thermostat won't be open yet, but it's still nice and warm into the top hose. So I think we've solved it at long bleeding last. So the last bit to tidy up was the wiring under here. So you can just see along the bulkhead here, there is some new black trunking. So that's hiding 2 wires, a green and a red wire. The green wire is from the temperature switch. The red one is from the oil pressure switch, which I haven't dealt with yet. I still haven't got an oil pressure light, which is something that's quite important. But as the engine's been rebuilt, I'm not that worried about it. But I will do that in due course. So they were just strung all the way around here and down to this little connector block down here while I was trying to find the right temperature switch and temperature gauge. Now I've done that, I thought I'd tidy it up. So I just need to clip the ends of these cable ties off so they're not flapping around. And you can see this is part of the Range Rover wiring looms. This was a Range Rover connector. So I've just snipped the wires as I've needed them. I've left the connector on until I've worked out what these are for. I think one of these is my charge light from the alternator, and possibly one that would feed a voltage gauge, but I've done that off a separate feed behind the dashboard, so I might just need to terminate one of these. But for now, this keeps them nice and sort of safe from shorting on anything, so it just kind of flap around there for the time being. And then the next job is going to be doors. So while the passenger door closes okay with a bit of force and opens okay, you can see the striker on there is absolutely shot. And you can see the hinges don't look great either, but this isn't the worst. So the passenger side isn't so bad. Ignore that, there's nothing to see here. It's really the driver's side that's the problem. So you can see this hinge is so bad, it's actually worn a groove in the bottom of here, and that's all dropped. So you've got the space in here, so this is absolutely dead. There's no, you're not going to be able to adjust that or shim it or do anything with it. Well, what that means is when you do this, you can't actually open the door. You've got to lift it. And it's like it unhooks. And you can see the striker plate on this side is absolutely ruined. So Britpart do the hinges and actually do the striker plates as well. Now, these are really, really hard to get hold of, because this is not the same type of striker as you get on a Series 3. It's also not the same as you get on a Defender. So they only made these for a couple of years, and Britpart seem to be the only ones that do them. I can't find them anywhere else, not for short of, you know, sub £100, which is ridiculous for what is a pressed piece of metal with a little bit sticking out. So if you've got a metal press and a bit of time on your hands, you might make a lot of money making some of these. And if you're going to do it, let me know, because I might have a few sets off you. Because yeah, that's not looking great. So back online to order some parts. Britpart is slightly annoying in that you can't order directly from them, so I've got to go and find a wholesaler. There's one in Desford I'm going to use. And then kind of getting a bit more of a workable Land Rover. The next thing after that I'm probably going to do is look to replace this dial with the rev counter, so I actually know what's going on in the engine. Now I've got the rest of the dials here, and try and work out how to sort the oil light, because that might be quite useful. Right, that's it for this episode of Automotive Tales and messing around with the Land Rover. We'll see you next time, where hopefully we'll go out and do some driving. Maybe we'll see if we can find some green lanes and put it to the test, and see what it can do in low box, see what a V8 Land Rover is really capable of. That'd be quite good fun, wouldn't it? If you know of any green lanes in the East Midlands that you think it might be worth having a challenge at, then, bleep bloop in the comments below. Right, bye. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.